I have given a lot of toasts in my life. Wedding toasts, retirement toasts, the toast I gave at my own mother's 80th birthday, with my voice shaking the whole way through. But I had never sat in a room and listened to someone else give a toast about my marriage before, not until the night of my husband's 40th, when my best friend of 19 years stood up with a glass of champagne in her hand and told the room that what she admired most about Daniel and me was our loyalty, our true love. How rare it was, she said, to see two people choose each other, over and over, for so many years. I raised my glass with everyone else. I even smiled. I have gotten very good at smiling. What none of them knew, what I had known for exactly 6 weeks, since the night I opened Daniel's email on our shared family laptop looking for a scanned copy of our insurance policy, was that the woman giving that toast had been in love with my husband, and he with her, for over a year. I had read enough that night to understand the shape of it. I hadn't read enough to understand how far it had already gone. I stayed for the cake. I stayed for the photographs. I hugged her goodbye at the door and told her the party was perfect, and I meant it, in the strange, hollowed-out way you can mean something you no longer feel. It was later that night, back home, the dishwasher running, my heels finally off my feet, that Daniel sat me down at our kitchen table and handed me a folder. Divorce papers. Already drafted. Already, it turned out, reviewed by someone else before I had ever seen them. I opened the folder slowly, and that was when I noticed whose handwriting was in the margins. The handwriting in the margins was small and slanted, the same handwriting I'd seen on 19 years of birthday cards, on the seating chart she'd made for my own wedding, on the sticky note she'd once left on my dashboard after a miscarriage I never told anyone else about. Notes in blue pen, precise and lawyerly, beside clauses about asset division and the house. Push for the Maple Street property. She'll want to keep it for sentimental reasons. Use that. I read that sentence 4 times before I fully understood what I was looking at. Not just a betrayal, a strategy. Vivian hadn't simply fallen in love with my husband. She had sat somewhere, her office probably, the one with the framed law degree she'd worked so hard for, and helped him build a case against me, using 19 years of knowing exactly which parts of my life I'd fight hardest to protect. Eleanor, Daniel's voice was careful, rehearsed. I know the timing seems careful, I said, before he could finish. My own voice surprised me with how level it came out. That's the word you're looking for. The timing seems careful. He had the decency, at least, to look uncomfortable. This isn't how I wanted tonight to go. No, I agreed, closing the folder gently, the way you might close a door you didn't want to slam. I imagine you wanted tonight to go exactly the way it went. The party, the toast, the papers afterward, once everyone had already gone home, and there was no one left to see my face. I thought about the toast then, really thought about it, the words replaying with a new and terrible clarity. Loyalty, true love, rare, to see two people choose each other, over and over. I understood now that Vivian hadn't been describing Daniel and me at all. She had been rehearsing a speech for her own future, standing in the middle of mine, using my marriage as a stage to practice the language she intended to use again, for someone else, someday. Maybe for him. How long has she known? I asked. About tonight. About the papers. Daniel hesitated, which was answer enough. She helped me find someone to draft them. She has contacts, from her firm. So the whole time she was standing in my kitchen last month, helping me pick a caterer for your party, I said slowly. She already knew she was going to hand you the paperwork to leave me before the candles were even blown out. He didn't answer that. He didn't need to. I want to say I cried that night. I didn't. I sat at that kitchen table until nearly 2 in the morning, long after Daniel had given up waiting for a reaction and gone to sleep in the guest room, as though he were the one who needed space. I read every page of that folder twice. I noted every place Vivian's handwriting appeared. 6 times, careful and small, always practical, never once betraying a flicker of guilt. Somewhere around 1:30, I stopped reading the document as a wife and started reading it as something else entirely. A woman cataloging evidence. I noticed, for instance, that the financial disclosures Daniel had prepared listed our joint savings at a figure nearly $40,000 lower than I remembered it being 3 months earlier, when I'd last checked the account during tax season. I noticed a line item labeled consulting fees that I didn't recognize, paid out over the last 5 months to a firm whose name meant nothing to me. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't call anyone, didn't cry into a pillow, didn't do any of the things I imagine people expected of me, if anyone besides Daniel and Vivian had known yet what was happening beneath the surface of my life. Instead, I photographed every page of that folder with my phone, page by page, careful to capture every note in Vivian's handwriting, every figure that didn't match what I remembered. Then I put the folder back exactly where he'd left it, turned off the kitchen light, and went upstairs, not to the guest room, not to confront him, but to the small desk in my sewing room, the one place in the house that had always been only mine. I opened my laptop, I typed Vivian's name into the search bar of our bank's online portal, checking, for the first time in 5 years of blind trust, whether she had ever had access to accounts she shouldn't have. The search returned a result I was not prepared for. Vivian's name appeared once, buried in an authorization log I hadn't known existed, dated 14 months earlier, long before I'd ever suspected anything, back when I still thought of her as simply my closest friend, the woman who'd held my hand in a hospital waiting room the year my father was dying. 14 months ago, someone using our joint account credentials had added a name to the list of individuals authorized to receive automated statements. Vivian Cho. Her personal email address, one I recognized instantly because I'd typed it into 1,000 messages myself over the years, plans for coffee, recipes, photographs of her nephew's birthday. I sat with that for a long time before I understood what it meant. She hadn't just known about the affair from the inside. She had been quietly watching our finances for over a year, receiving copies of statements Daniel and I never discussed with anyone, not even each other, in any real detail. I thought about every conversation we'd had in that time, every lunch, every phone call where she'd asked, with what I'd taken for warm concern, how the business was doing, whether Daniel and I were doing all right for money since I'd cut back my hours to help care for my mother. She hadn't been asking because she cared. She'd been asking because she already knew the answer and was measuring how much I knew. I didn't sleep. By 5 a.m, I had a legal pad covered in dates, initials, and question marks, the kind of documentation I imagine looks unhinged to anyone who doesn't understand that it is, in fact, the opposite. It is what clarity looks like when it finally arrives after months of being denied entry. I made a list of everyone who might be able to help me. My cousin Renata, a paralegal at a firm, 2 towns over, was the first name I wrote down and underlined twice. I called her at 8, the earliest hour I could justify without waking her children. I need someone who doesn't know Daniel, I told her, once I'd explained enough for her voice to go quiet and careful on the other end of the line. I need someone who isn't going to feel sorry for me and forget to be sharp. I know exactly who you need, she said. Give me an hour. By that afternoon, I was sitting across from an attorney named Margaret Ferris, a woman perhaps 10 years older than me with reading glasses pushed up into gray hair and a manner that suggested she had heard every version of every betrayal a marriage could produce, and had stopped being surprised by any of them decades ago. I laid out what I had, the photographed folder, the authorization log, the $40,000 discrepancy, the consulting fees I couldn't account for. Margaret went through it methodically, tapping her pen against certain lines, circling others. The authorization log is interesting, she said, but on its own it only proves she had access to information. It doesn't prove she used it against you, or that the two of them coordinated the divorce filing before separation, which matters more than you might think for how the assets get characterized. What do I need then? Proof of intent, she said. Something that shows this wasn't a private, individual betrayal that happened to overlap. Something that shows planning, emails, a paper trail between the two of them discussing the divorce, or discussing the money, before he ever told you he wanted out. I thought about the folder sitting on our kitchen table at home, about the handwriting in the margins, about a woman who had helped plan a legal strategy against me, while smiling at me over champagne 12 hours earlier. I think I might know where to look, I said. That evening, I went home to a house that felt different already, though nothing in it had physically changed. Daniel was in the living room, papers in a neat stack on the coffee table, waiting, I think, for me to either sign or scream, as though those were the only 2 options he'd prepared for. I didn't do either. I asked, instead, in a voice so calm it seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have, whether I could borrow his laptop to print something for my mother's estate paperwork. He hesitated only a second before handing it over. It was enough. I already knew his password. I had known it for years, the way you know small, unremarkable things about the people you love, never imagining you would ever need to use that knowledge against them. That night, after he'd gone to bed, I opened his email and began, carefully, methodically, to search. I gave myself 1 hour. Margaret had been clear on the phone earlier. Anything I found needed to be something I was legally entitled to access, on a device I had permission to use, or it could be thrown out entirely and, worse, used against me as evidence of misconduct. I wasn't a lawyer, but I understood enough to know I was walking a narrow line, and that the safest thing I could do was look only at what I needed, copy it carefully, and close the laptop before Daniel woke and found me at the kitchen table, at 1 a.m. for the second night running. I searched Vivian's name first. 14 months of correspondence appeared, more than I expected, more than 2 people discussing a legal strategy should reasonably have generated. I skimmed past the ones that made my chest tighten in ways I didn't have time to feel yet. I would feel them later, I promised myself, once I was somewhere safe to feel them, and focused on dates. Anything from before 6 weeks ago, before the night I'd first found evidence of the affair myself. Anything that proved this had been planned, not simply discovered and confessed. I found it at 12:47 in the morning, an email sent 11 months earlier. Subject line blank, the kind of email people send when they don't want it easily found by a search of obvious keywords. I talked to someone at the firm about how the Maple Street property would likely get characterized if we ever needed to go that route. Don't want you blindsided later. We should talk this weekend, not over email. We, not you and Eleanor. We, 11 months ago, long before any conversation Daniel and I had ever had about our marriage struggling, long before any counseling session, any late-night conversation about whether we were happy. 11 months ago, while I was planning his surprise 40th birthday party myself, the original plan, before Vivian had generously offered to take it over, telling me I deserved to relax and let someone else handle it for once. The 2 of them had already been discussing how to divide the life I still believed we were building together. I found 6 more emails after that, spaced out over months, each one a little bolder than the last, each one referring to the timeline and the right moment, like a plan being refined, rather than a marriage quietly dying of natural causes. In the most recent one, sent 3 weeks before the party, Vivian had written, "The party is good cover. Nobody will suspect anything that week, and it gives us a clean date to work backward from for the filing." Good cover. My husband's 40th birthday, the party I had wanted to plan myself, the toast about loyalty and true love, all of it, according to her own words, had been cover. A convenient date for legal paperwork. A performance staged, in part, for my benefit, so that I would spend the evening smiling and toasting, and suspecting nothing, right up until the moment the folder appeared on my kitchen table. I photographed every email. I forwarded copies to an account of my own that Daniel didn't know existed, one I'd quietly created the same week I first found evidence of the affair, some instinct already telling me, even then, that I would need somewhere safe to keep what I found. Then I closed the laptop, exactly as I'd found it, and sat in the dark kitchen for a long time, listening to the refrigerator hum and the house settle around me, thinking about 19 years of birthday cards and hospital waiting rooms, and a woman who had apparently been capable, the entire time, of loving me and plotting against me in the very same breath. At some point before dawn, my phone buzzed on the table beside me, a text message, sent to the wrong thread. I could tell instantly, because it began with a name that wasn't mine. "Vivian, are we still on for Thursday to finalize the numbers before E finds out anything else?" It was from Daniel, sent unmistakably to me. I stared at the message for a long moment, understanding 2 things at once. The first was that he had not yet realized his mistake, which meant I still had time before he tried to explain it away. The second was that there was a Thursday, a specific day already circled on some calendar I hadn't seen, when the 2 of them intended to finalize something involving numbers I hadn't been shown, numbers that, if the pattern held, were unlikely to favor me. I didn't respond. I took a screenshot, forwarded it to my own account alongside everything else, and finally, for the first time in 2 days, allowed myself to cry. Not from grief, exactly, though grief was somewhere in it, but from the strange, disorienting vertigo of realizing that the last several months of my life had been not a marriage falling apart, but a performance I hadn't known I was starring in. Then I wiped my face, opened a new document, and began writing down everything I would need to say to Margaret in the morning, because Thursday, whatever it was only 2 days away, and I intended to be ready for it before either of them realized I already knew. Margaret read the screenshot twice before she set her glasses down on the table between us. Thursday, she said slowly, is either a meeting with an accountant or a meeting with a buyer. Given the phrase, finalize the numbers, I'd guess the former. Do you have any idea what assets they might be discussing? I did, though I hadn't let myself say it aloud until that moment. My mother's house, I said. Not the Maple Street property. That's ours, together. I mean my mother's house, the one she left me 8 months ago when she passed. It's in my name only. There's no reason for Daniel to have any numbers about it at all. Margaret was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of someone recalculating the shape of a case in real time. If that's what Thursday is about, she said, then this isn't just a divorce anymore, Eleanor. If he's been supplying information about assets that were never part of your marital estate, we may be looking at something closer to fraud, depending on what they're planning to do with it. I thought about the last 8 months, how gentle Daniel had been after my mother's death, how he'd handled the funeral arrangements almost entirely himself, how grateful I had been, at the time, to have one less thing to carry. I thought about how he'd offered, so kindly, to help me deal with the paperwork on the house, since I was still too raw to look at it myself. I had signed things. I couldn't, sitting in Margaret's office, even remember exactly what. I need to see whatever I signed, I said, my voice not quite steady for the first time since this had all begun. I need to know what I gave him access to. It took Margaret's office 2 days to pull records from the county recorder, 2 days in which I moved through my own house like a stranger, conducting surveillance on a life she used to live in. I watched Daniel eat breakfast across from me and thought about 11-month-old emails. I watched him kiss my forehead on his way out the door and thought about the phrase, "Good cover." I said nothing. Margaret had been firm on this point. The moment he knew I was aware, he and Vivian would have every opportunity to cover whatever remained uncovered. The records came back on Wednesday afternoon, the day before whatever Thursday was going to bring. Buried in the paperwork I'd signed during the worst week of grief I had ever experienced was a limited power of attorney, granting Daniel authority to manage and represent my interests regarding my mother's estate, a document I had almost no memory of signing, though my signature, shaky and unfamiliar even to my own eyes, was undeniably there. "This is enormous," Margaret said, and for the first time since I'd hired her, I heard something like real anger enter her voice on my behalf. "This isn't garden-variety infidelity anymore, Eleanor. If he used this power of attorney to negotiate away rights to your mother's property that was never his to negotiate, while you were grieving and not in a position to read fine print carefully, that's something a court is going to take very seriously." I sat with that for a long moment, feeling something shift inside me that was different from the grief of the last 2 days, different even from the cold clarity of finding the emails. This was something closer to resolve. My mother had worked for 31 years as a school administrator, had saved carefully, had left me that house specifically, she'd told me once, so that I would always have somewhere to go if I ever needed it. She could not have imagined, writing that will, that the person I would need to be protected from was the man standing beside her casket, holding my hand. "What happens Thursday?" I asked. "If I let it happen?" Margaret considered the question carefully before answering. "If we do nothing, we let them show their hand completely. We learn exactly what they're planning, exactly how far this goes. If we intervene now, we protect the house immediately, but we may never see the full extent of what they intended." I thought about 19 years of friendship, about a toast given with a raised glass and a straight face, about a folder left on my kitchen table with careful handwriting in the margins. I thought about how much I still didn't know. "Let it happen," I said, "but I want to be there, not hiding, not spying through a laptop at 1 in the morning. I want to walk into that meeting myself. Margaret studied me for a long moment, and then, slowly, she began to smile. The first real smile I'd seen from her since we'd met. Then let's make sure, she said, that when you walk in, you're the only one in that room who knows exactly what's about to happen. Thursday arrived gray and ordinary, the kind of day that gives no warning of what it's about to hold. I told Daniel I had a lunch with a friend from my old book club, a lie so small and forgettable he didn't even look up from his coffee when I said it. By 11:30, I was sitting in Margaret's car 2 blocks from the accounting firm where the meeting was scheduled, going over, one final time, exactly what she needed me to do and, more importantly, exactly what I needed not to do. Let them finish, she said. Whatever is said in that room, let them say all of it before you speak. The moment you interrupt, you lose the advantage of having heard everything. I walked in 11 minutes after the meeting had started, timed deliberately, and found them exactly as I expected: Daniel, Vivian, and a man I didn't recognize, an accountant named Frank Reyes, spreadsheets open on the table showing, unmistakably, the projected value of my mother's house, columns labeled with terms like buyout offer and expedited sale, dated for a closing just 3 weeks away. Vivian saw me first. I watched the color drain from her face in real time, watched 19 years of carefully maintained warmth collapse into something much closer to what I imagined had always been underneath it. Daniel turned a half-second later, and for just a moment, before he composed himself, I saw genuine fear, not guilt, not yet, but the specific fear of a man realizing the audience has arrived before the performance was ready. Eleanor. Vivian recovered first, reaching for the easy, practiced tone she'd used on toasts and birthday cards for 19 years. This isn't what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like, I said, and I was surprised, again, at how calm my own voice sounded, how little it shook. I set a folder of my own on the table, copies of the emails, the authorization log, the power of attorney, the screenshot of a text message sent to the wrong thread. I have proof this was planned before he ever told me our marriage was over. I have proof you had access to my finances for over a year. And I have proof that the power of attorney I signed while grieving my mother was never meant to authorize the sale of a house that has never, at any point, belonged to anyone but me. Frank Reyes, to his credit, closed his laptop without being asked and quietly excused himself from the room, muttering something about needing to check on another file. What followed was not the dramatic confrontation I might have imagined in an earlier, angrier version of myself. Daniel tried, briefly, to argue that the power of attorney gave him authority. Margaret, standing calmly behind me, informed him, in the same even voice she used for everything, that a document signed under emotional duress 1 week after a parent's death, used to negotiate a sale never disclosed to its owner, was unlikely to survive a single afternoon in front of a judge, and that the far more interesting question, going forward, was whether the County Bar Association might have some interest in learning how Vivian's firm had assisted in drafting it. Vivian didn't say anything else. I think by then, she understood there was nothing left to say that wouldn't make things worse. The house never sold. The divorce, once it finally finalized 4 months later, looked very little like the version Daniel had drafted with Vivian's help. In the margins of that folder, the discrepancies in our joint accounts were accounted for, the consulting fees traced and returned, the Maple Street property divided fairly rather than strategically. Vivian's firm quietly parted ways with her the following spring, for reasons I was never told directly, though I had my suspicions. I heard, much later, secondhand, that she'd moved to another city entirely. I kept my mother's house. I go there most weekends now, sit on the back porch she loved, and think, sometimes, about the toast Vivian gave that night. Loyalty, true love, 2 people choosing each other over and over. I understand now that she wasn't lying. Exactly. She simply wasn't talking about Daniel and me. I raised my glass that night without knowing what was coming. I don't regret that I didn't know. I only regret how long it took me to understand that the people closest to us are sometimes the ones who've been quietly measuring the exits the whole time, and that the only real defense against that is to keep your own eyes open, even when smiling is easier. If Eleanor's story stayed with you, there's more where this came from. Quiet women, loud consequences. subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.